beginning of this year, I shared my most recent drum kit acquisition, a 4-piece Gretsch Brooklyn kit with 20-inch bass drum, along with 10 and 12-inch suspended toms, and a 14-inch floor tom. In my opinion, these drums are really the most versatile sizes to be well suited for anything from light jazz to harder and heavier styles like rock and pop. At the end of the video, I briefly teased how I'd already looked at some options for expanding upon this set with some larger drums, and honestly, the new street price to buy these drums quickly deterred me from even considering it. But within a couple weeks of releasing this video, I got a message from one of my fellow drum collector friends who does an insane amount of buying and selling. After seeing my video, he let me know that he had recently picked up a matching snare for my kit and wanted to give me right of first refusal before he went on selling it. I'll be the first to admit that my drum collection is probably larger than need be, but I've always prided myself on having a different use and function for every piece in it. So for me, the idea of owning another snare just because it matches my set doesn't really pass the threshold I need to bring it into my collection. So after declining the offer from my friend, I mentioned to him that if he ever sees a Brooklyn kit in gray oyster with 22-inch bass drum and 13 and 16-inch toms, to please think of me first. Without hesitation, he mentioned he did in fact have this exact kit last year, but moved on from it after not finding a buyer. I assumed the opportunity was over and the timing just didn't work out, and I was ready to end our conversation, but he then let me know he had actually traded this kit into Guitar Center in Milwaukee and thought that they still might have it currently 3 or 4 months later after he brought it in. I checked out the online inventory for used gear that Guitar Center lists on their website, but I couldn't find this specific kit. I decided to call the shop and see if they might still have it, and lucky for me, it was still there waiting for a buyer. A few days later, I took a trip down to Milwaukee, and after a bit of negotiating, I was able to get the price down on the Brooklyn set and work out a trade with my old Renown kit in order to only pay $800 for these 3 drums. Once I got home, I brought these drums down into the studio and started the process of changing heads out for more of my preferred setup. I started with the bass resonant head and swapped out the stock issued white coated head for an ebony head with the vintage Gretsch broadcaster style logo. And after that, I swapped out the batter side head for an Aquarian Super Kick 2. For the toms, I've learned to always just remove stock heads and store them in the case that I would ever sell the kit, as I think it really helps in the resale process. So for both the rack and the floor tom, I added my favorite heads, the Remo coated vintage ambassadors. At this point, I could begin using these drums, but there was more I was hoping to do in terms of getting the set to my liking, so after a couple weeks, I was able to get a few parts in and start the next phase of modifying these drums. First thing was getting a Gretsch tom holder plate to install on the bass drum. Now this isn't actually the mount I was planning to use, but I had this Catalina kit that I was planning to sell very soon, so I decided I could rob the mount that I prefer from that drum and put this standard issue gas cap mount back on the Catalinas. I know there's likely somebody in the comments fired up about my eagerness to destroy the purity of this bass drum and drill it out for a tom mount, but as somebody who pretty much always adds some sort of muffling to a kick drum, I've never felt like I'm losing some sonic advantage, and the convenience by avoiding extra stands and mounts for toms is just something I'm not willing to give up. I've shared this process on my channel before, and it's not too complicated aside from getting all the measurements right, but I always spend a lot of time double and triple checking every measurement from multiple reference points, and I recently picked up this flexible felt tape measure, which has been really great for being able to take measurements around a curved surface like a drum shell. I started by using a hole saw to drill out the main hole for the tom post to go through the shell, and after I had that, I used more standard drill bits to drill out each of the 4 mounting holes to secure the bracket in place. Again, I spent tons of time dry fitting the bracket in place and confirming the placement was square before drilling, but the process is really not complicated at all. The only thing I'd share in terms of technique is that if you're using a handheld drill like me, you want to make sure you're drilling perpendicular to the shell, which can be tricky on a curved surface. After I had all the holes drilled, I was able to secure the mount in place and rehead this drum and get it back in service. Around the same time, a shipment showed up with a new double tom arm mount, and although this shell pack didn't include 2 rack toms, I decided to purchase the double mount in this case because 1, the cost for a single tom holder is almost the same, and 2, if I ever want to use 2 rack toms with this kick, I then have another mount ready to go, and these Gretsch tom arms have a great design feature where you can take a drum key and remove one half of the mount from the post and basically have the same thing as the single tom arm. If you watched my video about my first Brooklyn drums, you may remember I opted to get rid of the larger traditional rim mounts that come standard issue with these drums and order the much smaller and sturdier GTS suspension mount from Gretsch. Typically I love a direct-to-shell style mount on toms, but I decided I wanted this set to be different and have more of a modern sound option in my studio. I'm guessing I'll probably still add muffling to these drums in most settings, but you can always take sustain away and you can never really add it back in. I struggled the first time around to find 10 and 12 inch mounts available, as most dealers were out of stock, and the used market for parts like this can be pretty limited. But eventually, I found some used brackets and got them in within a couple weeks of beginning my search. When I went to begin my search for a 13 inch mount, I had hopes I'd be able to find one pretty quickly, but I soon learned that it was going to be much more challenging than I had originally anticipated. I began my search in mid-March, and after finding no options on the used market or from any dealer, I inquired with Gretsch directly to discover there was a delay of a shipment from overseas and the product was back-ordered. They had a tentative date of late May for availability, but as you're well aware in today's world, that's by no means a guarantee. I made some posts on some Gretsch message boards, and after a few attempts weeks apart, I was able to finally track one down by early May. So after working out a price with the other party, I was able to get this one sent out, and within a week, I had the final puzzle piece I'd been looking for to complete this new set of drums. I really love this mount for its design, how it replaces two of the standard lugs and swaps them out with new built-in lugs right into the bracket, and it's a very simple swap and by no means a permanent change. So it'd be just as easy to go back to the older rim style mounts, or drill out a direct-to-shell mount, or even no mount at all on the drum. My only concern with this mount initially was not being able to clip on my microphones in the region where the mount sits, but actually, I found that my mic clip still fits, and I can move them around in and out with this mount, so not a problem at all. So now with these drums exactly the way I wanted, I set everything up to record a demo. I opted to just do one tuning, because as much as I'd love to showcase the versatility of these drums, I see these as some gut-punching big fat rock and roll tubs, and I can't really see where I'd tune these up for jazz the same way I would with the smaller drums. In the spirit of letting my inner rock star come out, I paired these drums up with my 14 inch by 6.5 inch Black Beauty style brass drum from Drum Supply House. For this demo, I used a mic setup with an SE Electronics V-Kick on the bass, a Shure SM57 on the snare, Sennheiser E604s on both toms, and a pair of Shure KSM 137s in an XY configuration for the overheads. personally never been a big fan or proponent of larger drums in the past, and I've always managed to get by with kick drums between 18 and 20 inches, and toms between 10 to 14 inches. But over the last few years, as I've tried to step up my game as a remote session drummer, I've found that I can't get this sound with smaller drums. Although I feel totally out of my element behind this kit, I've had a blast playing on it and trying to let my inner rock drummer come through a bit more. These drums have a punch and power to them that I just can't match by tuning smaller drums any lower. And these drums fill a huge void in my toolbox of sounds. I'm positive these 3 drums will surely get used in plenty of pop and rock tracking, and I'm sure that these drums will inspire me to add a few heavier music choices to the list of songs I cover and transcribe, because as much as I enjoy the challenge of transcribing drum parts note for note, I also love the challenge of picking the right equipment and tuning the drums to get as close to the same sound as the original. There's no reason I couldn't have bought any set in these sizes and gotten the same value, but by choosing to add the exact same drums in the same finish as my other Brooklyn kit, it gives me the ability to mix and match these drums in so many different configurations. So here's a few of my favorites that I've come up with so far. Okay, so I doubt I'm ever going to use all the drums at once, but I had to at least try it, right? As of right now, this shell bank feels pretty complete, and even though Gretsch does offer some other sizes, like an 8-inch tom or a variety of other bass drums, I really don't see myself expanding this out anymore. And I have this same exact set at home.
Man.
Same finish.
Do you have an 18 with it?
No.
I have an 18 I might not want anymore.
So I might have been lying when I said I wouldn't be adding any more drums to this set. But in the end, I was able to save close to $1,000 by buying used on this set, and honestly, it helped me move on from a kit that I wasn't having a ton of action on anyways. I'd love to hear your thoughts on not only these new drums, but also the concept of a shell bank, so leave a comment down below. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel to stay up to date on future video releases. And until next time, thanks.